The wind howled across the desert, carving the dunes into sharp, shifting sculptures. Amara tightened her shawl against the biting grains, her eyes fixed on the strange shimmer in the distance. She wasn't one to believe in omens, but the elders' hushed whispers echoed in her mind. The sands remember. The shimmering grew closer, an unnatural dance of light that defied the waning sun. It wasn't a mirage, she was sure of that now. Her camel stirred uneasily beneath her, its guttural grunts vibrating against the strange tension in the air. Amara dismounted, her feet sinking into the warm sand. The air felt alive. "Stay here," she whispered, stroking the camel's flank before stepping forward. Her hands trembled, but her curiosity burned brighter than her fear. She'd heard of the artifacts buried in these sands, relics of gods and kings, but this was unlike anything described in the ancient scrolls. As she approached, the shimmer coalesced, revealing a swarm of fine golden particles swirling like a miniature storm. The swarm pulsed, emitting faint musical tones that made her feel as if she were hearing an ancient hymn through layers of time. Her breath hitched as the swarm shifted, forming shapes, faces, hands, eyes, before dissolving back into chaos. "Amara," a voice whispered, not from the wind but from within her mind. Her knees buckled and she sank into the sand. "Oh, what are you?" The swarm slowed, spiraling toward her like a cautious animal approaching its prey. Then it spoke again, its voice a symphony of tones that merged into a single resonant harmony. "Ptah, creator, sustainer, you are chosen." The words vibrated in her skull, resonating with a warmth that eased her trembling. "Ptah, the god of craftsmen and builders. Once, before names and stories simplified our purpose," the voice replied. "We are more than gods. We are the foundation, the essence of what you call divinity." Amara's mind raced. The myths had always painted the gods as beings of flesh and divine power. This was different. "You're not a god. You're technology." The swarm pulsed, almost as if amused. "We are what you perceive as gods. Long ago we emerged from the fabric of this world, born of its sands and its heat. Your ancestors called us gods, and we accepted their worship to guide them. In turn they gave us form and purpose." Amara's fingers dug into the sand. "Why now? Why me?" "Your world has forgotten us," Ptah said, the swarm inching closer. "And yet the world is fractured. Warp. The balance we once maintained has tipped. Rival swarms stir, unbound by purpose, driven only by chaos." Images flooded Amara's mind. Cities crumbling under dark storms, rivers running red, and skies filled with ash. She saw ancient battles where swarms like Ptah clashed, consuming entire armies in their struggle for dominance. She saw kings rising with the power of these swarms, their reigns ending in ruin when their bonds failed. "The plagues," she whispered. "The stories of divine punishment, they were your wars." "Not wars," Ptah corrected. "Correction attempts. When the swarms lose their hosts, they become unstable. Without purpose they devour." The realization hit her like a blow. These beings weren't gods. They were symbiotic intelligences, their powers limited and amplified by their human hosts. The entire mythology of her people was built on this relationship. The gods hadn't guided humanity, they had partnered with it. Ptah's swarm swirled around her, an invitation. "You must help restore the balance, Amara. Bond with me. Together we can heal this fractured world." Amara's heart pounded. To bond with a swarm, an ancient intelligence, was unthinkable, yet the temptation was undeniable. She thought of the elders in her village, clinging to old stories while the sands encroached on their homes. She thought of the children coughing from the poisoned air, the crops failing under the harsh sun. If this being could bring balance, could she refuse? "What happens if I say no?" she asked. The swarm stilled, hovering in front of her face. "Others will come. Not all are as patient as I. Their hosts will suffer, and their hunger will spread." Amara closed her eyes, weighing the choice. She thought of her father's teachings. Every great change begins with a risk. When she opened them, her resolve was firm. I'll do it. The swarm surged forward, engulfing her in a golden vortex. The world dissolved into light and sound as Ptah's essence fused with her own. She felt her body hum with energy, her senses sharpening to an almost unbearable clarity. Her mind expanded, memories that weren't hers flooding in. Images of ancient temples, the construction of the Great Pyramids, and the rise and fall of empires. When the light faded, she stood taller, her body glowing faintly with golden veins that pulsed beneath her skin. Felt full, complete. What now? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her. We begin, Ptah replied. But first you must understand your power. Amara extended her hand, and the sands obeyed, rising and swirling into intricate shapes. A falcon, a scepter, a rising sun. The feeling was intoxicating, but she knew it came with a cost. The balance Ptah spoke of was fragile, and her role in maintaining it would demand everything she had. A low rumble interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see another shimmer on the horizon, darker and more chaotic than Ptah's golden swarm. It moved with aggression, a roiling storm of black particles that devoured the sands in its path. Seth, Ptah said, his voice grim. Chaos incarnate. He has awoken. Amara felt her pulse quicken. The myths of Seth, the god of storms and disorder, had always been the most terrifying. If Ptah's swarm was harmony, Seth's was destruction. Why now? She asked. Why are they waking up after all this time? The world's imbalance has called them, Ptah said. They seek to reshape it in their image. Amara's hands clenched into fists. She had barely bonded with Ptah, and already the weight of her new reality pressed down on her. But she couldn't turn back now. The sands had chosen her, and the world's survival depended on what she did next. As the dark swarm approached, Amara took a deep breath, her golden glow intensifying. The balance was her responsibility now, and she would fight for it, no matter the cost. The desert seemed to hold its breath as two ancient forces prepared to collide, their human hosts standing at the center of it all. Amara's journey was just beginning, and the sands whispered a single, undeniable truth. The gods are not finished with us yet. The dark swarm loomed closer, a chaotic vortex of shadow that seemed to consume the very light around it. Amara's pulse raced as Seth's presence pressed against her mind, a cold, oppressive weight filled with malice and disdain. You dare oppose me, little host? The voice rumbled through her consciousness, layered with centuries of rage and power. Do you think bonding with a relic of harmony makes you my equal? Amara steeled herself, letting Ptah's calm presence flow through her. The golden glow of her body intensified, her connection to the sands deepening with every breath. This isn't about being your equal, she said, her voice firm. It's about balance. The world has suffered enough. Seth's laughter was a harsh, grating sound, like stone grinding against stone. Balance. Feudal concept. The strong reshape the weak. That is the truth of the desert and the gods. The dark swarm surged forward, its chaotic tendrils reaching for her. Amara reacted instinctively, raising her hands. Ptah's power coursed through her, and the sands obeyed her will, rising in a golden wave to meet Seth's attack. The two forces collided, creating a shockwave that rippled across the dunes, scattering sand like a storm. Amara staggered but held her ground. Her hands burned with energy as she manipulated the sands, forming barriers and strikes to counter Seth's relentless assault. Each clash felt like a battle not just of power but of wills. Seth's chaos against Ptah's harmony, destruction against creation. You are strong for a fledgling, Seth sneered, his swarm retreating momentarily to regroup. But strength without resolve is meaningless. Do you even understand what you fight for? Amara hesitated, the weight of his words pressing down on her. What was she fighting for? Balance, yes, but what did that mean in a world where the sands themselves had forgotten their gods? She fights for life. Ptah's voice resonated within her, steady and unwavering. For a world that can thrive without chaos consuming it. Life. Seth spat. The life you and your kind shaped into complacent servants. Your so-called balance is stagnation. Chaos brings growth. Age. Power. The dark swarm charged again, faster and more ferocious. Amara gritted her teeth, focusing all her energy into the sands beneath her feet. This time she didn't just defend, she attacked. Golden spires shot from the ground, piercing through the edges of Seth's swarm and forcing it to fragment. The scattered particles regrouped quickly, but she had made her mark. "You underestimate me," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "I'm not here to be your pawn or Ptah's. I'm here for my people, for the world you're trying to destroy." Seth's swarm shifted, forming a massive shadowy figure that loomed over her. Its eyes burned with crimson light, and its voice dripped with mockery. "Your people. They are insects, scurrying in the sands, blind to the power beneath their feet. Why fight for them when you could rule them?" Amara's heart wavered for a moment. She felt the temptation in his words, the seductive promise of control and freedom from fear. But then she thought of her village, the children playing in the dusty streets, the elders sharing stories by firelight. She thought of the future they deserved, one free from the chaos Seth embodied. "I fight because they can't," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Because someone has to stand against you." Seth's form flickered, the crimson light in his eyes dimming momentarily. Then he surged forward, his voice a roar of fury. "Then you will fall as they have fallen before you." The dark swarm enveloped her, and for a moment all was silence. Amara felt the oppressive weight of Seth's chaos pressing into her mind, seeking to overwhelm her, to crush her resolve. But within that storm she found Ptah's voice, a calm, steady beacon. "Focus, Amara. Chaos cannot consume you unless you let it. Find the harmony within yourself." She closed her eyes, shutting out Seth's taunts and the oppressive darkness. She reached deep within, feeling the connection she shared with Ptah and the sands around her. Slowly, she began to weave the chaos, shaping it with her will. The darkness resisted, but she persisted, bending it into patterns, creating order where there had been none. The golden glow around her flared, and the dark swarm recoiled as if burned. Amara opened her eyes, her body radiating a light so bright it seemed to push back the very shadows. Seth hissed, his form flickering. "This isn't over, host. Chaos is eternal. You may hold me back today, but I will return." With that, the dark swarm retreated, vanishing into the horizon. The desert was still once more, but Amara knew this was only the beginning. She sank to her knees, exhaustion washing over her. Ptah's voice was gentle now, like a soothing breeze. "You did well, Amara. But the balance is not yet restored. Seth will return, and others will awaken." Amara nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Then I'll be ready. For them, for the balance, for the world." The sands whispered around her, carrying her resolve into the vast desert. She was no longer just Amara, the curious wanderer. She was Amara, the bearer of Ptah's light, the guardian of balance. And her journey was far from over. The desert cooled as night descended, the stars emerging one by one to cast their silver glow over the dunes. Amara lay on her back, staring at the sky, her body still humming faintly with Ptah's energy. The confrontation with Seth had drained her, but it had also awakened something within her, a purpose she couldn't yet fully grasp. "Ptah," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. What did Seth mean when he said chaos brings growth? He sounded almost convincing. Ptah's response was thoughtful, his tone softer than before. "Chaos is a force of change, Amara. It disrupts stagnation, forcing adaptation. But without guidance, it becomes destruction. Balance does not mean the absence of chaos, it means its containment, its integration into a greater whole." Amara mulled over his words, watching a shooting star streak across the sky. "So, he's not entirely wrong." "No," Ptah admitted. "But his vision of change is one of unbridled destruction. He sees no value in what already exists, only in tearing it down to create something new. That is why balance is essential, to temper chaos with harmony." Amara sat up, brushing sand from her arms. The horizon stretched endlessly before her, the dark silhouette of distant mountains barely visible against the starlit sky. She couldn't shake the feeling that Seth's retreat wasn't a victory. It was a warning. What do I need to do? She asked. If Seth isn't the only one out there, how do I stop them? Ptah's presence seemed to settle around her like a comforting cloak. You must understand the nature of the swarms. Each of us represents a principle, a force that shaped your world in its infancy. You have bonded with me, but there are others, some dormant, others already awakened. To restore balance, you must find them. Unite those who can help and confront those who seek to destroy. Amara frowned. You make it sound simple, but I barely survived Seth. What if I'm not strong enough? You are stronger than you realize, Ptah said. The bond between us is still new. As you grow, so will your power. But strength alone will not be enough. You will need allies, both human and divine. Her thoughts drifted to her village. The elders would think her mad if she told them about the swarms, the gods, and the battle she had just fought. But perhaps there were others beyond her small world. Others who might understand, who might help. Where do we start? She asked, rising to her feet. Ptah guided her gaze toward the north, where the stars seemed to shimmer with an unnatural brilliance. There is an ancient temple buried in the sands beyond those mountains. It was once a place of communion between humanity and the swarms. If it still stands, it may hold the answers you seek. Amara tightened her shawl and glanced at her camel, still grazing nearby. The journey ahead would be long and dangerous, but she had no choice. The balance of the world, and the survival of her people, depended on her. As she prepared to set out, a faint rustling sound caught her attention. She turned, her body tense, and saw a figure emerging from the shadows of the dunes. It was a man, his silhouette outlined by the faint golden glow of the sands. Amara, the man said, his voice deep and unfamiliar. You're not the only one bonded to a swarm. She froze, her mind racing. Was this an ally, or another rival? Ptah was silent, but she could feel his awareness sharpening, readying her for whatever came next. Who are you? She demanded, her hands instinctively reaching for the sands at her feet. The man stepped closer, his features illuminated by the moonlight. His eyes glowed faintly, the same golden hue that pulsed within her. My name is Kale. I was bonded to Thoth centuries ago, before the swarms went dormant. Amara's breath caught. Thoth, the god of wisdom and knowledge. You're immortal. In a way, Kale said, his expression unreadable. The bond with a swarm sustains life, but it's not without cost. I've been wandering these sands, waiting for the time when the swarms would awaken again. And now here you are. She didn't lower her guard. If you're bonded to Thoth, why didn't you stop Seth? Why wait until now to show yourself? Kale's gaze darkened. I've been searching for others like you, for those who can stand against the chaos. But I can't fight this battle alone. The swarms are waking faster than I expected, and their hosts won't always have noble intentions. Amara hesitated, sensing both truth and pain in his words. He had the air of someone who had carried a heavy burden for far too long. What do you want from me? Kale smiled faintly, his golden eyes meeting hers. I want to help you. If we're going to restore balance, we'll need each other. The swarms may be ancient, but their influence in this world is just beginning. Amara studied him, weighing her options. Trust didn't come easily, but Kale's presence felt less like a threat and more like an opportunity, a chance to learn, to grow, and to stand a chance against the rising tide of chaos. Fine, she said, extending a hand. But if you're lying to me, I'll bury you in these sands. Kale chuckled, shaking her hand. Fair enough. As they set out toward the distant mountains, the desert seemed to come alive around them, the whispers of the sands growing louder. The balance was shifting, and Amara knew her journey had only just begun. The desert night wrapped them in silence, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps on the sand and the occasional distant howl of the wind. Amara walked ahead, her eyes fixed on the faint shimmer of stars guiding their path. Kale followed a few paces behind, his golden gaze scanning the horizon, ever watchful. The weight of their shared silence gnawed at her. She didn't trust him, how could she? Yet the quiet confidence in his movements suggested he knew far more than he let on. Finally, she couldn't hold back her questions. How long have you been this? She asked, glancing over her shoulder. Bonded. Live. Kale smiled faintly, his eyes catching the moonlight. Long enough to see empires rise and fall, to watch humanity forget the truths it once lived by. His voice carried a weariness that made Amara shiver. That doesn't really answer my question. 3,000 years, he said at last, his tone soft but unwavering. I was a scribe in the court of Pharaoh Djoser. When the swarms first bonded with humans, they chose those who could wield knowledge and wisdom with care. Thoth found me suitable. Amara stopped, turning to face him. 3,000 years. And you've been wandering the desert all that time? Not exactly, Kale replied, his gaze distant. I've seen much of the world, learned its secrets, but the swarms always pull us back to the sands. This place. It's where everything began. She frowned, her curiosity battling with skepticism. If you've been bonded for so long, why didn't you stop things from getting this bad? Why let the world forget? Kale's expression darkened, shadows crossing his face. You think I didn't try? The swarms are powerful, but they are not gods, no matter what they've let humanity believe. Their influence depends on us, their hosts. Without unity among us, their power fragments. When the ancient bonds failed, chaos took over. Rival swarms fought for dominance, and humanity suffered the consequences. We were exiled to the edges of memory, reduced to myth. Amara studied him, trying to read the layers of pain in his voice. So now you want to try again. Unite the hosts, restore balance. Kale nodded, his golden eyes locking onto hers. It's the only way. The swarms are waking faster than ever, and Seth's re-emergence is just the beginning. If we don't act, the chaos will consume everything. Amara turned back to the path, her mind racing. She had barely begun to understand her own bond with Ptah, and now she was being thrust into a world of ancient conflicts and unimaginable stakes. The weight of it pressed against her chest, but she forced herself to keep moving. What's this temple we're heading to? She asked after a long pause. Ptah mentioned it might hold answers. Kale's gaze flicked to the horizon. The Temple of Zep Tepi. It was the first site where humans and swarms bonded. A place of communion, where wisdom was passed down and balance was maintained. If it still stands, it may contain artifacts or records that can guide us. And if it doesn't, then we'll find another way, Kale said simply. We always do. The certainty in his voice irritated her. You talk like this is just another task. Like you've done this before. Kale chuckled, a low, dry sound. Many times. But every time it's different. Every host is different. You're unlike any I've encountered before. Amara narrowed her eyes at him. What's that supposed to mean? You're new to this, he said, his tone thoughtful. Most hosts are chosen after years of preparation, training. You were spontaneous, unscripted. That makes you unpredictable. Is that supposed to be a compliment? Kale's smile returned, faint but genuine. It's an observation. But it might be exactly what we need. Amara didn't respond. She wasn't sure she liked being called unpredictable, but a small part of her appreciated the acknowledgement. If she was going to survive this, she'd have to trust her instincts, flawed or not. The first hint of dawn painted the sky in pale hues of orange and gold as they reached the base of the mountains. The air grew cooler, and the sands gave way to rocky terrain. Amara paused to catch her breath, the glow of her bond with Ptah flickering faintly in her veins. We're close, Kale said, his voice softer now. The temple is hidden in a canyon beyond these ridges. Amara scanned the jagged peaks, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and unease. Do you think Seth's swarm could follow us here? It's possible, Kale admitted. But the temple is sacred ground. The energy of the swarms is stronger there. It might give us an advantage. Or it might draw them straight to us, she muttered, adjusting her shawl. Kale smiled faintly. That too. They climbed in silence, the weight of their mission settling heavily between them. As they crested the final ridge, Amara's breath caught in her throat. Below them, the canyon stretched wide, its walls carved with intricate hieroglyphs that glowed faintly in the dim light. At its center stood the temple, a massive structure of black stone veined with gold. It radiated an otherworldly aura, its surface shimmering like liquid under the rising sun. "This is it," Kale said, his voice filled with reverence. "The Temple of Zep Tepi." Amara's heart raced as they descended into the canyon. The air felt charged, humming with an energy that made her skin tingle. She could feel Ptah's presence growing stronger, his voice a steady rhythm in her mind. As they approached the temple, a deep, resonant sound echoed through the canyon, stopping them in their tracks. The hieroglyphs on the temple walls flared to life, casting the entire canyon in golden light. "Something's activating," Amara whispered, her hand instinctively reaching for the sands at her feet. Kale's eyes narrowed, his body tensing. "We're not alone." Before she could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. From the shadows of the temple emerged a figure, its form flickering with dark energy. Crimson light glowed in its eyes, and its voice rumbled with familiar menace. "Seth," Kale muttered, his hands curling into fists. "He's already here." Amara's heart pounded as the dark figure stepped forward, its presence suffocating. But she refused to back down. With Ptah's power surging within her, she stood her ground, her golden glow intensifying. The balance was tipping, and the battle for its restoration was just beginning.